Welcome back to Medrash U'Maisa, sharing a story for this week's Parshas Yisro. The late Talmud Chacham and therapist Rav Shlomo Hoffman had many interactions with Gedolei Yisrael over his life. One of them happened when he was a young yeshiva bocher in the Hebron yeshiva, and his close friend, Rav Beryl Schwartzman Zatzal, who went on to become a great Rosh Yeshiva and one of the greatest Gaonim of the generation, had made a mistake in his paperwork with the Israeli army authorities, and even though full-time yeshiva students were deferred from drafting into the army, he took a trip to Chutz La'aretz without letting them know, and he was about to be drafted immediately. Now, at the time, the Vad HaYeshivas, the official organization, which really organized all of these things, the registration of yeshiva students and the presenting of the list to the army for deferral, was headed by two great Rabbanim. One was the Rav Rashi, the chief rabbi, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Hertzog Zatzal, and the other was Rav Yisro Zalman Meltzer Zatzal, the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Eitz Chaim. Now, Rav Beryl Schwartzman was actually, at this point, I believe, already related to Rav Yisro Zalman by marriage. So his friend Rav Shlomo Hoffman went running to the house of Hertzog first. And he came, he knocked on the door opened a crack, and Rav Hertzog's wife, the Rebbetzin, whispered very quietly that the Rav is very sick and he can't see anybody right now. And Rav Shlomo Hoffman said, this is something that has to be taken care of immediately. There's really no time to spare. And she was explaining to him that this is serious and the Rav is sick and he must rest. Meanwhile, as this argument was going on, so they heard the Rav's voice saying, "Who's there? Send him in." So Rav Shlomo came in and he saw that Rav Hertzog was lying in bed wrapped up in a blanket and his face was clearly on fire. It was clear that he had a high fever. It turned out that it was a fever of 40, which is about 104 in Fahrenheit. So Rav Shlomo told him about the problem, and Rav Hertzog said, "I have never used my influence to influence this process at all because I've been afraid that if I ask for a favor, so things are going to be asked from me in return, and there might be pressure on me to agree to things that I don't want to agree." So Rav Shlomo said to him, "I'm surprised that the Rav didn't ask me why I didn't go first to Rav Yisro Zalman Meltzer." So Hertzog said, "What's the answer?" He says, "Because I knew how upset Rav Yisro Zalman would be to hear about this, and I didn't want to cause him distress. I didn't want to upset Rav Yisro Zalman." When he heard this, Rav Hertzog sat up in bed. He said, "Rav Yisro Zalman would be upset?" And he immediately put on his shoes and went to the table and wrote a letter and stamped it and sent him off. In this week's Parsha, we see that Yisro was so distressed at Moshe Rabbeinu's huge workload, his fear that Moshe Rabbeinu would be worn out, it would be bad for the people. Here we see this combination of Kavod HaTorah that a great Gaon like Rav Hertzog had for Rav Yisro Zalman, and worrying about his distress to the extent that he both got out of bed in his illness and did something that he hadn't done before to help the situation, because he didn't want Rav Yisro Zalman to be upset or distressed. Now there's a continuation to this story. Rav Shalom Povarsky, the son of the great Rosh Yeshiva and Panovich Rav Dovid Povarsky Zatzal, once met Rav Shlomo Hoffman in the street. He said, "Oh, Rav Shlomo, I know that you spent a lot of time with Rav Hertzog. Do you have any stories about Rav Hertzog that I could tell my father?" So this was the story that Rav Shlomo told him. And Rav Shlomo was so happy and grateful. He said, "Oh, thank you so much." He said, Rav Shlomo asked him, why are you so overjoyed with this? He says, "You see, my father had tremendous Hakaras Hatov to Rav Hertzog, because Rav Hertzog was the one who got him the certificate, the visa, the entry papers that enabled him to enter Eretz Yisrael. So he's always looking, as part of his Hakaras Hatov, as part of his recognition of the good to Rav Hertzog, to hear more and more stories about the greatness and the righteousness of Rav Hertzog." So aside from the beautiful midah that this expresses, it really gives a different understanding of the term Hakaras Hatov. Hakaras Hatov we always explain as meaning to recognize the good action that was done, recognize the benefit that I received from someone. From Reb Dovid's idea of trying to hear more and more about how good the person is, how good his benefactor is, that Hakaras Hatov is not just recognizing the good of the act, it's recognizing the good of the person who did the act. And that when someone benefited you, part of your Hakaras Hatov is to learn more and more and to be able to see more and more about the good of that person. This parsha also is a parsha of Hakaras Hatov, Yisro's famous expression, Baruch Hashem asher itzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim miyad Paro, the praise to Hashem when he heard about how Hashem saved Bnei Yisrael. So, in the schus of these tzaddikim, right, may we have a Shabbos of Kabbalas HaTorah, which involves the Bein Adam Lamokom, the Bein Adam Lachavero, the care and empathy for others, the Kavod of Torah, which was expressed by Har Sinai, and the Hakaras Hatov for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for all that He has done for us, and hopefully for all the good that He will be doing for us in the near future, as Am Yisrael will see Yeshua's Bekarov. Have a wonderful Shabbos.